On June 7th, 1990, Universal Studios Florida opened to the general public, and here we are in 2022, 32 years later, and a whole lot has changed. And in today's video, we're going to take a trip down memory lane, show you guys some of the attractions that used to be here in the past, compare them with the attractions that we're here now, and kind of have a nostalgic day here at Universal Studios, reminiscing on what was back in 1990.
Now you can go beyond the realm of any movie into the future of live entertainment, where every adventure you've seen on the screen happens to you. This is no ordinary theme park. It's a real working motion picture and television studio, and you're the star. Come to the only place on Earth where everything that happens in the movies happens to you. The only place where you can join Doc Brown on a rocket ride into a new dimension of thrills and excitement as you go back to the future. Live the movies at Universal Studios, Florida. No one makes believe like we do.
And we're gonna start right here in the front of the park at the front entrance, which looks pretty similar to how it did back on opening day in 1990 with some subtle differences. You can see that the arches and the little mini arches next to the main one were always the main theme of the front entrance here at Universal, but it was not as big and grand as it is now. You can see they've added the Universal Studios Florida logo with the globe out in the front. Back in the day, it used to just say Universal Studios across the top. And over here, which is where you can pick up your tickets at will call and deal with guest services, that building still stands as it is today. You can also see in this photo that directly in front of the main entranceway, there was a little area with plants and everything, and then they had the DeLorean out here as well. So the overall theme has stayed the same with the arches, but it does look quite different now than it did all those years ago. And the Universal Studios Administration Building has remained the same, basically as it was in 1990. It did receive a paint job, I'm assuming some roof upgrades as well, but even some of the smaller details like the blue awnings are still above where you can pick up your tickets over at will call. So it's pretty cool to see that this building's structure is pretty much the same as it was in 1990. We're about to head inside and we came across this "How tall are you" sign to see if you could ride some of the attractions that are inside Universal Studios, and there is only one attraction that still stands from opening day, and of course that is E.T. Adventure. Basically all the other ride buildings are the same for certain attractions, and we'll dive a little bit deeper into that as the day progresses. But yeah, just one opening day attraction remains here 32 years later. So we are making our way inside of Universal Studios now, and we are coming up on our first attraction that we are going to be discussing, and that is Despicable Me, Minion Mayhem, and the origin of this ride building. So of course back in 1990, Despicable Me did not exist yet, and this building was originally home to the Funtastic world of Hanna-Barbera, which opened on June 7th, 1990, located in Soundstage 42 in Production Central, which is exactly where this building is now. And it featured a whole bunch of Hanna-Barbera characters like the Jetsons and Yogi Bear, and the audience was in for the ride of their lives. And the technology was basically the same as Despicable Me. It's a motion simulator where the seats move, and then they also had the stationary seats available back then as well. Now as we take a look at the show building itself, you can see that the yellow soundstage building is the same as it was then, obviously painted differently, and now it has Minions paraphernalia all over it. But if you look at the top architectural design of the building, you can see that it is the same exact building, and there was no changes made to it other than just retheming this ride and changing it into a couple of things since it was the Hanna-Barbera attraction. And due to decline in popularity, the Funtastic world of Hanna-Barbera was eventually replaced with Jimmy Neutron's Nicktoon Blast, which was the second attraction to be housed in this building. It opened on April 11, 2003, where it ran until August 19, 2011. And of course, it was based on the 2001 movie Jimmy Neutron Boy Genius, which was very popular for Nickelodeon at the time. It featured SpongeBob, the Rugrats, the Fairly Odd Parents, and a whole bunch more of your favorite Nick characters. And that was right here in this building as well. I very much remember riding Jimmy Neutron Nicktoon Blast. It was so much fun. and just standing here talking about it gets me really nostalgic. But of course, nothing lasts forever, including attractions, and in 2012, Despicable Me Minion Mayhem officially replaced Jimmy Neutron's Nicktoon Blast, and that is the attraction that stands here at Universal Studios Florida until this day. Also over here in Production Central was Shrek 4D most recently, but on opening day it was Alfred Hitchcock, The Art of Making Movies, which was kind of a part 3D show, part live action tribute to Alfred Hitchcock's 43 years with Universal Studios. This building right here was exactly the same. I know we're here during Halloween Horror Nights, so try to ignore the Horror Nights decorations, but this building looked exactly as it did, as did this. Now when Shrek came in, there was a big Shrek 4D sign that went over this facade right here, but now that it's peeled back, you can see it has the original shape of the Alfred Hitchcock one with that point in the middle. Now Alfred Hitchcock Art of Making Movies closed on January 3rd, 2003, and Shrek 4D opened on June 12th of that same year, and it ran for almost 20 years. So we will see what will replace this in the future. And as you're walking into Universal Studios, you can see the New York City facade all around here. You can see the buildings, you can see the New York Public Library straight ahead with the buildings that look like they're off in the distance. And that was because back in the 80s and early 90s, actual movie sets were still being used very, very prominently. They still are today, but it was very commonplace to film on an actual set with facade. So that's why Universal went with this look. So on opening day in 1990, this spot was home to the Ghostbusters Spooktacular. It closed in 1996 to make way for Twister Ride It Out, but it was a really cool attraction and something that I wish they still had here at Universal. They had a tour guide that would talk about the Ghostbuster movies and how she didn't believe in ghosts or anything like that. Slimer would appear and Gozer along with a whole bunch of other ghosts, and then the Ghostbusters would come in and save the day. The Stay Puft Marshmallow Man was involved. It was really, really cool. That version ran until 1993, where the attraction was revamped for another one, but this is something that I always wish I was able to experience back in the 90s. I didn't come to Universal until the early 2000s, so unfortunately I didn't see it, but this is really, really awesome, and I would love if they brought this back one day. But the front entrance was really cool, and they had the firehouse facade like they had in the New York set, so you can see that the firehouse still stands today, almost as a tribute to the Ghostbusters attraction that was here in the past. Of course, Rip Ride Rocket comes roaring through it now. And then down here is the New York Public Library, which of course was for the Ghostbusters attraction to just kind of enhance the area. And if you look closely at some of the buildings on top, you will recognize them from the Ghostbusters film series. That building right there in the center of your screen, that is where Dana and Louis lived. So pretty neat to see that even the buildings in the background were Ghostbusters themed. And then there's a cool little Easter egg that I want to show you. And if you take a look at this window in front of the firehouse, you'll find an ad for a paranormal travel agent, a nod to Ghostbusters. And on May 4th, 1998, Twister Ride It Out opened up in place of the Ghostbusters attraction. Of course, it was based on the very popular 1996 film. It ran until November 1st, 2015, and it was really neat because you got to experience a lifelike encounter with a tornado. There were water effects, fire effects, movements of objects. It was really neat. And something else that's interesting is that Universal actually consulted tornado meteorologists to make sure that the ride was accurate. So a lot of attention to detail went into Twister Ride It Out. Unfortunately, it went seasonal in 2009, which kind of spelt the end for the attraction, which, like I said, closed on November 1st, 2015 to make way for Race to New York starring Jimmy Fallon. And outside the Race to New York starring Jimmy Fallon, there are a couple of nods to Twister, like Bill Paxton's light blue shirt, and then this sign for Twister Cola. Now the next attraction we are going to talk about is Revenge of the Mummy, but prior to Revenge of the Mummy, this was home to Kongfrontation, an opening day attraction here at Universal Studios that closed on September 8th, 2002. It was based on the 1976 film as well as King Kong Encounter from Universal Hollywood, and it had two giant King Kong animatronics. Now, as you can see by the photos, it looks pretty much the same. Obviously, the Revenge of the Mummy facade is new, but if you look at the building behind it, It still has some of the same architectural details, like that railing up top, and then the locker station with the Paradise sign. This is exactly the same as it was back then. So the more we're doing this, the more I'm realizing that Universal kept a lot of their building structure the same over the years. Now, the original King Kong animatronic from the one over in Hollywood was actually designed by legendary Disney Imagineer Bob Gurr. And prior to researching for this video, I had no idea that Bob Gurr had any association with Universal. So that's pretty cool. Also, the King Kong animatronic had banana-scented breath. And if you're a fan of Easter eggs, next time you're on Revenge of the Mummy, in the second room, there is a gold King Kong statue. Keep an eye out for it. And that's their little nod to Kongfrontation that was here prior. Now, all of these building facades have a lot of Easter eggs on them. We're not gonna have the time to dive into them all today. Maybe we'll do another video on just the New York Easter eggs. But like this one, for example, the Hudson Street Home for Girls. This is a nod to Annie. We are now in the San Francisco area of the park, and we are standing in front of what is today Fast and the Furious Supercharged. But if you go all the way back to 1990, this was the home of Earthquake, which was a classic ride that puts you in the middle of an earthquake scenario. The official name of the attraction was Earthquake the Big One, and it opened with the park on June 7th, 1990. It was a 20-minute experience that allowed guests to experience an 8.3 magnitude earthquake, all while inside of a subway car. The idea for this attraction came from part of the Hollywood studio tour, actually, and there was a portion of that tour where you experience an earthquake. So they decided to bring it here to Orlando and give it its own standalone attraction. Earthquake the Big One ran until November 5th, 2007, when Universal confirmed that this attraction would receive a refurbishment, and then it was rebranded into Disaster. It was a similar concept where you're experiencing a natural disaster for yourself. Of course, it featured Christopher Walken in the pre-show, and the attraction was similar, yet a little bit different. Fast forward to August 25th, 2015, and that is when Universal announced that Disaster would be closing in September, making way for a new attraction based on the Fast and the Furious film franchise, which is still here to this day. There was a lot of cool effects used in this attraction. There was a flash flood, there were fire effects. It was awesome. I very vividly remember going on both Earthquake and Disaster when I was a kid, and I wish that that would still be here, because I don't know about you guys, but I am not really a fan of Fast and the Furious. It's an attraction that I've done, I think, maybe once or twice, and that's about it. I don't need to do it again. But the ones that were here before it were very cool. Also in the area of San Francisco, of course, you have Lombard's Seafood Grill, which is a restaurant, Lombard's Landing. Over here, you have the lagoon that looks across to the Animal Actor stage. And then there is the Jaws shark that is one of the very few references to an attraction that once was the fan favorite Jaws. Now, as we're making our way towards the Wizarding World of Harry Potter, of course you have King's Cross Station here, which is where you can ride the Hogwarts Express, and then just straight ahead you can enter Diagon Alley, but this was not always Diagon Alley. Now, it is hard to believe now because the Wizarding World is so popular for Universal, but we are standing on the former site of the Jaws attraction, which opened in 1990 with the park. It was an original opening day attraction and has since been replaced by the Wizarding World of Harry Potter Diagon Alley. Jaws was inspired by part of the Universal Tram Tour over in Hollywood, and they decided, just like Earthquake, to give it its own full attraction here in Florida. Now, a little fun fact, when Universal opened in 1990, they had so many problems with the Jaws ride system and the Jaws animatronic that they actually got into a lawsuit with the company that built the Jaws attraction. It was closed for like 2 years as they were trying to get it up and working consistently throughout 91 and 92. And then they actually brought in an entirely new company to redesign the ride system, fix the animatronics, and then Jaws ran for as long as it did after that. But it was interesting that there was so many technical problems when the ride first opened. Jaws went through many refurbishments throughout the years. They closed temporarily in 2005 because of a petroleum price increase, which was used to operate a lot of the pyro effects that were in the ride. It reopened again in December of that year, but then it went seasonal. And then it also went under refurbishment literally every year from 2008 to 2011. So Jaws was a very tough ride to maintain. And on December 2nd, 2011, Universal announced that the Jaws attraction, along with the entire Amity area, would close on January 2nd, 2012, to make room for an exciting new experience. Of course, that ended up becoming the Wizarding World of Harry Potter, Diagon Alley. And it is pretty crazy to think that it was only 10 years ago that this did not exist. Wizarding World of Harry Potter, of course, opened in Islands first, and then they brought the expansion over this way. But it's interesting to think about what Universal would be today if it wasn't for the Wizarding World. And we all know Universal likes to hide Easter eggs, just like we showed you over at Jimmy Fallon with the Twister artifacts. And I know of a few that are here in Diagon Alley. I'm sure there's a lot more, but I'll show you the ones that I'm aware of that reference Jaws. Like over here at Bowman E. Wright's, which is an interactive wand station and a blacksmith shop. All these chains that are hanging up in here, as well as this rope, were used on the Jaws attraction. Over here in Wiseacre's Wizarding Equipment, if you look up top, there's a whole bunch of like telescopes and all these other little knickknacks. And a lot of these pieces of artifacts were used parts of the old Jaws ride. And there was a boat that was in the ride queue, and this instrument right here was made out of all those old parts. So as we exited Diagon Alley, walked across the bridge around the lagoon, we ended up here in Springfield. And this is, of course, themed after The Simpsons. And this massive show building is currently home to the Simpsons ride. But did you know that before the Simpsons were here, there was a Back to the Future attraction? On May 2nd, 1991, Back to the Future, the ride, opened up here at Universal Studios, Florida, and it ran until March 30th, 2007, when it was replaced by the Simpsons ride. The ride is actually a bit of a sequel to Back to the Future 3, and the ride vehicle, of course, was a DeLorean. This was a motion simulator ride, similar to how the Simpsons is now, but not nearly as intense as the Simpsons ride is. The story is centered around the pursuit of Biff Tannen through time, and Steven Spielberg was the creative consultant on this attraction, which is pretty cool. The Back to the Future attraction is somewhat, in a way, an answer to Star Tours over at Disney World and Disneyland. And they said they could probably never do a Star Tours, and Steven Spielberg was all for doing a similar type of experience in a similar vehicle with chase scenes. And if you remember Back to the Future, the ride, and you compare it to Star Tours, they are pretty similar as far as the operations of the ride goes and just the general feel of the ride. As far as Easter eggs go, when the construction walls were up around this building, they had one of the characters from The Simpsons wear Marty McFly's jacket from the movie, and that was outside on the construction walls. And to this day, in one of the videos that you watch while you're in line, Doc Brown is in one of the videos. So if you happen to catch it, you will recognize Christopher Lloyd's voice as he plays Doc Brown in the pre-show ride video. Of course, the front facade is completely different, but the large rectangular show building is pretty much the same as it was when this was Back to the Future. Of course, in front they have the DeLorean, and over by Men in Black is where you can see the train from Back to the Future 3. So this whole area had a really cool Back to the Future feel. But again, if you look at the structure of the building, you will recognize that big boxy shape because that's what it looked like with a different facade for Back to the Future. Now, if you are a Back to the Future fan and you still want to get your fix, you can still meet Doc Brown here at Universal Studios. You can take your picture with the DeLorean, and then they also have the train that was over by Men in Black. They moved that over by the exit of Springfield. We'll take a walk over there and show you that now. Over here directly across from Richter's Burger Company on the other side of the lagoon, there is the DeLorean. And Doc Brown often meets right over here in this spot. So you can get your picture taken with Doc Brown and the DeLorean. And then if you want to see the train from Back to the Future 3, that is right over here as well. And like I mentioned, the only opening day attraction still standing to this day is E.T. Adventure, a classic Universal attraction and a fan favorite. This ride was somewhat of a sequel to E.T. because we go to E.T.'s home planet, and a lot of this attraction was based off of a book. The ride does replicate the bike chase scene from E.T., where you go to E.T.'s home planet, which is the Green Planet. Steven Spielberg really liked that idea, but he wanted to make sure that it wasn't scary and that it was still kid-friendly and that they would have a personal moment, quote unquote, with E.T. while on this attraction. And the personal moment that guests ended up having was at the end of the ride. To this day, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but E.T. is there and he says goodbye and says your name. So when you first go on the ride, you have to tell the ride attendant what your name is, and then E.T. at the end will say goodbye Matt, goodbye Alex, whatever your name is, and he could recognize like 20,000 names. So that was the personal element that Spielberg wanted. Another opening day show was Animal Actors, and it is still here to this day. A very, very fun show. If you want to see some tricks done by some animals, it's a lot of fun and the kids always love it. Another opening day show that is still here is Universal's horror makeup show. It was around in 1990. It went through a lot of different iterations of this, but it still runs to this day, and it's so much fun. It's a great, great show. I said this in one of our Horror Nights videos. I don't know why it's not open during HHN. Something that I always loved about the horror makeup show was the emphasis on the Universal classic monsters. And right here, right outside the front entrance, you can see they have a movie poster for the Wolfman. And over here in Hollywood, a lot of these building facades and stores are as they were back in the 90s as well. Like Williams of Hollywood, which was the former prop shop. The dark room is still here to this day as well, and it looks basically the same. Across the street you have Ralph's, as well as the Five and Dime and the Beverly Wilshire Hotel. Pretty cool. And that Schwab's Pharmacy, again, still here, looks the same. And over here by this box office sign, which is currently advertising nothing because the space is not being used, if you hang a right and follow the arrows, walk past Rip Ride Rocket and down this path, it'll lead you to a familiar sight if you're a 90s kid. And here it is, the former home of Nickelodeon Studios, then turned the Blue Man Group. But this is where Nickelodeon Studios existed from 1990 until 2005. And if you're a fan of the 90s, like I said, you will recognize a lot of the shows that took place in here. So back when Universal Studios opened in 1990, this was actually an attraction that was made for kids, and they would have kids, tourist kids, act as contestants and audience members on the Nickelodeon shows that they filmed here, which was really, really cool. Like I said in the beginning of the video, I didn't come to Universal Studios until the early 2000s, so I was never able to experience this, but I was always so jealous of all those kids that got to be in the audience for some of our favorite Nickelodeon shows. And that's what sparked us shooting this video, is Alex and I actually were watching All That on Netflix the other night. We started looking up old photos, and then we were like, hey, let's go shoot a video about old school Universal. And behind these very doors, there was over 2,000 episodes of Nickelodeon original programming that were filmed here, and some of the shows that were filmed here, Family Double Dare, Slime Time, Global Guts, Clarissa Explains It All, Keenan and Kel, Figure It Out, Nickelodeon Guts, the 1999 Kids' Choice Awards was filmed here, Nickelodeon Gas, Legends of the Hidden Temple, Double Dare 2000, so many of the iconic shows from my childhood. So that is going to do it for today's video. A little trip down memory lane for classic old school Universal Studios. I forgot how much they were really all about riding the movies, and talking about some of the attractions we got to talk about today really makes me miss some of the old stuff. Of course, I love everything new that's here and all the things that are going to be coming to Universal Parks, but just thinking about the 90s and kind of getting nostalgic for a little bit was a lot of fun. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I really enjoyed making this one. This is probably one of our favorite videos that I've ever made, so if you guys enjoyed it, please give it a nice big thumbs up. It really does help out the channel. If you guys are new here, subscribe down below so you don't miss out on videos just like this one. And who knows, there's a lot of theme parks in Central Florida. Maybe we'll do a little history of some of the other ones as well. But thank you for watching. We'll see you guys real soon.